This is Criteria.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Criteria. I'm Thomas Miras. I'm here with my co-host and my pal Hal, James Majewski. Hello, James.
Hello, Thomas. I'm glad to be the resident pal Hal here.
All right, cool. We are talking today, doing a quick first impressions, I would say, of the new Martin Scorsese film currently in theaters, Killers of the Flower Moon, based on a book about a very tragic episode in Native American history in the past century. Now, actually, while we're on the topic of Native American history, James, you have recently been in a project involving Native American history yourself, and
Indeed,
maybe a little bit more of a hopeful
and
one.
Actually, what's interesting is that I have a little bit of Native American. I think it's I've got Mexican Chihuahua ancestry.
Chihuahua?
Yeah, I think that's if I'm
Okay.
remembering correctly, one of my ancestors was a Texas Ranger who ended up marrying a Native woman down in Texas, and anyway. So,
well, that's interesting because my in middle school, my my nickname to 2 or 3 people was the Rabid Chihuahua. I don't know if you remember this. This was before we started hanging out.
What you're referring to actually is that as of now, when we're recording this, the first episode has been released of me playing St. Isaac Jogues in a 5-part radio drama about his life and about his mission to the Mohawk and Iroquois Indians in present day Canada, but also New York. This was a very meaningful thing for me to be able to do because you and I both live in New York. We've traveled to the shrine of the North American martyrs and got to visit these incredible sites where St. Isaac Jogues walked and preached, So the first episode came out today, and there'll be an episode released every day this week. So perhaps by the time this episode comes out and people are listening to it, maybe all the episodes will be available. And that's you can find that by going to the Merry Beggars. They're the entertainment branch of Relevant Radio. It's their Saints project, the Saints. They've been doing 5-part audio dramas of a number of different saints. They've done St. Francis of Assisi, St. John Paul II. They did St. Kateri last week, and that was played by my wife, Karina, who's sometimes on the Audiobooks podcast.
Right.
But so it was a very
cool.
I
listened to episode 1 today, and I enjoyed it. So
I had to.
A lot of the writing done by our mutual friend Kevin Collins is just taken straight from St. Isaac's own, journals, letters.
That's right.
Things that he wrote.
Yeah, there's a lot of material that was written, these firsthand accounts by Isaac Jogues himself, and I'm pretty sure several sections in the audio drama are actually quoting from that pretty directly. So very cool.
I have a fond memory of dressing up as him for All Saints Day at my Catholic elementary school.
Yeah,
a long time ago.
Yeah, well, he suffered terribly. I remember us learning about him in 7th or 8th grade, and it was, I thought, just a brilliant move by our teacher to tell a classroom full of boys about these martyrs who died these really horrific deaths. And I remember an entire class period being spent just going into the detail of the tortures that they endured. And of course, a bunch of 12, 13-year-old boys, are just can't get enough of that. But it made a big impression on me at the time. And so even now, as an adult, it was very, very meaningful and powerful to go visit the shrine. Anybody listening to this should definitely, if you get a chance to, definitely visit the Shrine of the North American Martyrs in upstate New York.
I recommend.
But then also, to have this opportunity to play him. I had to drum up a French accent with like short notice, very little preparation. And so I was a little worried about how that might, in the end turn out. But listening to the episode today, I'm really, really pleased. It's not too cringe inducing.
Right. Yeah. Great. Well, so today, we're talking about Killers of the Flower Moon. And this is a project long in the making for Scorsese. And, it's well, where do we start with this? It's basically the real story of these early 20th century Osage Indians, and they were basically they were quite poor, and then suddenly they found abundant oil on their land, and then they very quickly became, like, I think it said in the movie that they were the wealthiest people per capita in the world for a while there because of this oil they discovered. And so they're just really living well, and all of these white people from around the country are coming in and working for them and stuff, but also trying to get some of that money, and so the story, and this isn't a spoiler because it's basically, you're told that this is what's going on pretty much at the beginning of the movie, and it's a true story, is that these white men started marrying a lot of Indian women, and the something with the inheritance goes through the maternal line in this tribe, and suddenly all of these Indian women just start mysteriously dying. And it's, basically what we know now is that these men were murdering these women. These men were murdering their wives, or allowing their wives to be murdered, taking part in this conspiracy, basically, in order to get all of this money into their own hands. And so Scorsese adapts this nonfiction book on the topic, Killers of the Flower Moon, and he takes it to a large extent from the point of view of the conspirators, which we can talk about, but the closest thing to the main protagonist of the film, I would say, is played by Leo DiCaprio, and so we see it through his eyes, and we also see it also in terms of how it affects his relationship with his wife, an Indian woman, Molly Burkhart, played by a Native American actress, Lily Gladstone. And, there's a genuine sort of affection between them that sort of is part of this story as well. But yeah, so it's a 3.5 hour movie. And there were 35 minutes of previews, something like that, before we saw it, which I thought was unforgivable. Of course, that's not Scorsese's fault. In fact, there were 2 Marvel trailers back to back right before we saw the movie, which was kind of ironic given Scorsese's critiques of Marvel. But yeah.
I think that Scorsese is also of particular interest because he's kind of emerged as this spokesman for an idea of cinema that, I think he characterizes as endangered, in threat of extinction. He's been critical of what's happened with Hollywood blockbusters becoming, Marvelized, or I think he's compared them to theme park attractions and other things that might I think, to someone who enjoys those movies, or maybe is not familiar with a longer cinematic tradition, not that those necessarily go hand in hand. You can enjoy cinema and also enjoy those movies, but I think that maybe that can rub people the wrong way, and I think that maybe a good starting point for trying to understand where Scorsese is coming from is to begin looking at the films that he's made, but also that he's continuing to make now. So there's a statement being made, I think, with this film right off the bat by its length. I think that it's not everyone who gets to release a 3.5 hour film.
No intermission.
Right. And so so I think right there already is a stake being, claimed for cinema, that this can be something that, can accommodate extended scrutiny, or sort of staying with something for a very long time. I don't know how long these superhero movies tend to run, but I imagine that part of why he wanted to release something so lengthy was to go into something in a deep way. Now, whether he accomplishes that in this particular film or not, I'm not totally sure. I will say that I never felt itchy in my seat. I was like, ooh, get me out of here.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. Okay, so the average length, I just Googled this, the average length for Marvel movies comes in around 2 hours and 12 minutes.
Wow.
And only well, the first one to cross the 3 hour mark was Avengers Endgame.
Hmm.
So I don't know. Anyway, so yeah, I didn't find it boring. I also didn't find it incredibly gripping.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of like in between, in a way that's kind of an accomplishment in itself, that somebody could make a movie that's that long and not a movie I would call great, but also not bore me
Yeah.
for the most part.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But by that same token, I ended up, getting to the end of the film and feeling a little bit like, well, did it really need to be that long? I don't know
Right.
that
Yeah. No, I
I
agree.
reached the end of this feeling like it really warranted that length. Now, I'm not
Right. But there's a certain craft that goes into it. Like it's good acting, it's good cinematography,
hmm
the dialogue is well written, and all of those things contribute to, keeping it from being outright boring.
Totally. Of course, of course. And we've watched long films before on this podcast. We had to sit through
Napoleon.
several hours of Napoleon. Yeah. And there's something even there, for instance, there was something really epic in its scope. It's telling a man's whole life, and we go through several years. We begin with his childhood, and so the length felt appropriate. Here the focus is pretty direct. What we've got is basically a crime drama,
Right.
and but also interestingly somehow also a western. It's one of the things that I liked about it was that it kind of drew on these two great traditions in cinema of the gangster epic, but also the western, and sort of synthesized them in this very pleasant way. So when you're thinking about cinematic tradition and like what Hollywood has done successfully in the past, those two genres loom large. And so having them both represented here, I thought was pretty neat. And actually that connects to probably what I found most satisfactory about the film was its world building, the sense in which it creates another world. I think this is something that Scorsese is very good at.
Right.
So if you talk about a film like, well, Silence, for instance, that's in Japan, or
We just did The Age of Innocence on this podcast.
oh, totally, yeah, The Age of Innocence, or even going all the way back to Mean Streets. I think
Right.
that Scorsese excels in creating a cinematic world that you can kind of feel and taste, and it's like very very realized.
Well, for me, the most interesting thing to talk about is, why the film is the story is being told from the perspective it's being told from. The victim character that we get to know the best is Molly Burkhart, played by Lily Gladstone. And when I say victim, I don't want to say that she doesn't have agency or whatever, but the fact is that's the role that she plays in this film. She isn't able to do much. She does try to sort of start investigations to find out what's happening, but for the most part she's a victim, even though she's got a strong personality in many ways, and it's a very compelling character. And I think probably the thing I enjoyed most about the movie is her performance. And she's got that actress has a very interesting face and can be very expressive in unconventional ways. But Scorsese chooses to tell this story from the perspective of these white men who are killing off these Indians. And, it's one thing it's not is an anti-hero story. You wouldn't call this an anti-hero. Not every film with a immoral protagonist is an anti-hero. I don't know how exactly you would define that term, but I think we can agree on that probably. Obviously he wouldn't be able to get away with an anti-hero glorifying kind of retelling of this story. He wouldn't have been able to do that in the 1940s, let alone now with, having us sort of rooting for, a white man who is involved in the murder of Native American women, right? But we're still expected to be sort of engaged with the Leo DiCaprio protagonist and sort of, I would imagine, to sympathize with him to some extent. And so when I say that, he's not an anti-hero, part of the reason for that is that I don't find myself particularly sympathetic with him. So I don't know how much of that is a success of the film versus a failure of the film in that sense, because I'm less interested in the story precisely because the guy I'm spending the most time with, I don't sympathize with him really much at all, except in the basic sort of facts that I hope he does the right thing at various points in the movie, but I'm not really able to be compelled in seeing things from his perspective.
Yeah, it is interesting because as much as things are told from his perspective, we do end up spending a lot of time with the Native American woman whom he marries, Molly. And Molly, it's strange because sometimes the film asks us to have sympathy for both of these characters, but then sometimes it feels like it's at cross purposes. So that again, it's like there's a kind of ambivalence that emerges. Like, how am I supposed to feel about this? Without spoiling the ending, there is this question of what's going to happen to their marriage. And I'm not totally sure that the film gives us much, that the film is sure where it wants us to stand on that. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like sometimes it feels like we're being asked to believe in the possibility that their marriage could survive. And then in other times it's almost like we're not. And so yeah.
Well, we should say a little something. We should probably clarify about what kind of character the Leo DiCaprio character is, in order so people can understand why Scorsese might expect us to sympathize with him in any way.
Right. Right. Well, I don't know what the real world character that the guy that this historical figure that this character is based on. I don't know what his motivations were, but in the film, it seems pretty clear that this character, whom Leonardo DiCaprio plays, is kind of slow. Maybe he's like a lower IQ. He's very easily manipulated by his uncle, played by Robert De Niro, who's really the crime boss at the center of all of this organized crime. He's a political boss too. He basically owns everything. If not actually, he wields a tremendous amount of influence over everything in this area. So in that sense, we can sympathize with this character somewhat because we can see him being manipulated and used. In another way in which we're asked to have sympathy for him is that we can see that there are real ties of affection between him and Molly, and that he may even believe himself that he mainly married her for love, if not also for her money. And so this is a line that we're given, and again, I'm not sure what we're expected to do with that, because it's like, well, okay, does that mean we're supposed to be rooting for him? Does that mean we're supposed to be holding out for him to have a change of heart? Because basically through the most of the film, he's kind of going deeper and deeper and deeper into this conspiracy that his uncle is at the center of, and but
he's involved in killing. He's even involved in the killing of his wife's sisters. And various other people in the story. And so it's not like when we say he's being manipulated, it's not like he doesn't know that evil is being done.
Right.
Maybe he doesn't know what the ultimate end game is as regards his marriage or anything like that. But he is. He's not mentally retarded. He's stupid, but he's able to comprehend that things he's doing are evil.
And it also shows us early on that he's basically without scruples, because almost just as soon as he arrives in this town, he starts
right,
doing petty theft and stuff like that.
I would almost describe him as a sociopath, if not for the fact that none of these men who are committing these crimes in the movie really show any scruples about how they treat Native Americans at all.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not distinct from everybody else in that respect.
Yeah. So strange, like interesting move. Because on the one hand, we do get to spend more time with kind of where Scorsese so often excels. I mean, a lot of people think about him almost exclusively as a gangster movie director,
Mm-hmm.
and so this, in a lot of ways, is very par for the course for him.
Right.
But then, it's also interesting too, because we have this romance that the film tracks, and this relationship, this marital relationship that the film is tracking, but that's also where it starts to get muddy. Now, you
Right.
mentioned this actress who plays Molly. She's awesome. And it would be very easy for her to, I mean, she's clearly in a supporting role, but it would be it seems to me like it would have been very easy to have a shift where the film becomes from her
Mm-hmm.
perspective. She could have
Sure.
anchored
Yeah,
that
yeah.
down. So it is an interesting choice that Scorsese has
Especially
made.
towards the end, when she is more actively trying to investigate what's going on.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think that, do you have any ideas about what this choice?
Well, it could have done a number of things. He could have done a number of things, and my understanding is the book has a lot more about the FBI investigation of all of this, and that there was originally more of that in the script, but they cut a lot of it. So they could have done it more entirely from the focus of the investigators, or they could have played it more from the more completely. It's not like it's not at all from her perspective, but more completely from her perspective, or the perspective of the Native Americans. If you had done that, because she's still in the end isn't really able to do much for herself or her community, what I would think is that story from her perspective would simply lean even more into whatever aspect of horror movie is in this movie, and so I think I could see somebody doing it that way. If you were to do it from the FBI perspective, among other things, perhaps there's less there's less information that we have access to throughout the story, because they don't come in until later. And if we tell it from her perspective, there's also a lot less information that we have. So he would have to find a solid way of telling the story. It would have probably had to be a shorter movie, because there would have been less time to spend fleshing out the plot, and it would have been more little hints and bits of things that are making her uneasy here and there, almost like a Rosemary's Baby,
Sure.
Type situation.
Sure.
Playing it from the perspective of the bad guy or the deranged guy is in Scorsese's wheelhouse for a reason, and there's themes that he's interested in dealing with, and certainly just human corruption is one of those themes.
Yeah.
And so I think that I think, and I have some reason to believe this based on a comment that I heard him make in an interview too, that the reason he's showing it from the perspective of the bad guys, even if the main character is supposed to be somewhat sympathetic, is probably to make the audience feel somewhat implicated, or have a sense of their own moral responsibility and their own involvement in benefiting from crimes, whether these crimes in particular or from just the crimes that we inevitably benefit from in any society you live in.
Sure. And
you end up benefiting from somebody else's crimes to some extent.
And one gets the impression too that he wants to impress upon audiences, the capacity for self-delusion of, saying that I really love this person, I care for this person is, my wife or my husband, or I protect them. And then, out of the other side of your mouth, you're actually doing things that are quite abusive and deceptive and lying. And
yes,
and I don't think that the film is a very strong portrait of that. I think that there are much better instances of this. And one wonders if that isn't also somehow related to Well, threads that you can pick up in say Silence, where he it's almost like he condones, or he does set out to try to condone apostasy,
Right.
So there does seem to be like this this interest in how you hurt the ones you love. But
Right.
but it kind of falls flat here, It's not super compelling. I mean, it does come up and you think about it, but it's also just like, no, but this guy is just a slime bag,
Right. Well, so the film, to me, that the sort of aesthetic hallmark, the impression that I come away with from watching this film is this sense of sort of like plotting inevitability. That these terrible things are happening. There's nothing anybody can do to stop it. You sort of know from the beginning, in general, what's going to happen throughout the film. You don't know all the details of the ending, but and that's emphasized by the Robbie Robertson score, which for the most part is this very kind of like monotonous, throbbing kind of feel. So that's a particular aesthetic, right? That's a particular feeling that you take away from watching the film. But it's all, and so in that sense, it's successful if that's what you wanted to give you. But it's also a liability aesthetically because it can undercut dramatic tension, right? There is a sense of inevitability and horror in Oedipus Rex, right? Wouldn't you agree?
Sure.
And yet that play has twists and real surprises to it, and so there is a way to do a sense of inevitability and like this dawning horror that is not so devoid of dramatic tension. He's telling the story from the perspective of the wicked, partly to implicate the audience. If that's so, that might be fine. You might have to make us sympathize more with the protagonist in order to do that. You might have to do a better job of tricking us into sympathizing with the protagonist, which of course has its own moral liabilities, right? I mean, a show like Breaking Bad, this is a man who is deceiving his wife and doing all sorts of things. But it's less direct, it's not like from the beginning of the show, he's being hired to rob and to murder innocent people.
Right.
He's making drugs. He's doing it to he's dying of cancer. All these things. It brings him deeper into it as it goes on. From the beginning, our protagonist in Killers of the Flower Moon is willing to murder, pretty much. And it's not like he feels particularly conflicted about it. I mean, Walter White in Breaking Bad, we get an early episode where he has to kill someone for the first time, and it is in some sense in self-defense, even though he has the guy tied up and helpless. And there's like a whole episode where he's spending, fretting about it. And you can argue that is a cheap way of lulling the audience into sympathizing with someone. So as long as you're conflicted about it, then we're willing to buy in and sympathize with the bad guy, as long as he shows that he's conflicted, even though he goes ahead and does the evil thing in the end. You know what I mean? That's sort of like a thing that a lot of stories do these days. As though like, as long as you're like conflicted and, I mean, the Silence thing too, right?
Sure.
But again, the thing is that if you're going to implicate the audience, you have to implicate them. And I didn't really feel implicated because this didn't feel like a regular guy and anybody could have found themselves in this situation. Well, and I'm sure there's, go ahead.
Well, this touches on something that I think is both a strength and a weakness of the film, which is that somehow Scorsese has managed to make a film that is very in keeping with the zeitgeist of present fads and taboos of Hollywood today, without compromising artistic integrity. And so let me explain that. He's made a film that sort of checks all the boxes of what the Hollywood establishment is looking for in terms of its sort of ideological nods to diversity or strong female leads or whatever. And he's managed to do that without the result being something that comes across as gimmicky or hacky or woke. However, I do think it's still constrained by the culture and the zeitgeist of Hollywood right now. in that it's not able to like really lean into what could make this character relatable or sympathetic, and it has to really kind of stop short at, well, he's racist or something, like that. It's like this is a contempt for human life that is, yes, motivated by money, but also spurred by a kind of white supremacy. And throughout the film, this is something that is tracked, is white resentment of wealthy Indians. Now, that's fine, right? But what I think could have been more interesting and could have been more capable of drawing an audience in would be to show how this kind of tension arises whenever there is a group that is more affluent and one that is more disenfranchised. What you have here is a very interesting role reversal where poor, lower class white men and women are moving to the space where there's a lot of wealth, and they're trying to, they're fulfilling the service jobs. They're maids and they're chauffeurs, and this is interesting. But what you get too is class resentment. Now, if that had been more examined, and how it cuts both ways, how when you're in a position of affluence, how that can breed a certain hubris that maybe leads to blindness, or a certain disdain that continues the cycle of violence and resentment. Now that could have all been very interesting and also very capable of drawing an audience in and generating more complicated relationships, among the characters, but also with the audience and particular characters. But because it does seem to be a little flatlined, where it's like, here are these greedy, racist white people, and here are these like noble savages who are wealthy. You know what I mean? It's a little bit of that. And now, everybody's familiar with the term noble savage. That's like, I'm not describing them. I hope everybody understands what I mean when I say that. But you know what I mean? It's like, it does feel like the film is hamstringed a little bit in this regard, simply because of the time in which it's made.
Yeah, and the idea is kind of like the whole white community in the film is complicit in these crimes,
which is cool too.
I agree.
Yeah.
I'm not complaining about that. It's insofar as we observe them, that's true. But the thing is that the focus is on the people actually doing the murders rather than people who are indirectly benefiting from them. And we do get a bit of this in the scene where all of his friends and family gather around the protagonist in order to try to convince him not to testify near the end of the film. And it's even his sisters are there, and everybody's just universally saying, don't testify against your uncle. And so there's a bit of that there, but because we're really not seeing it at all from the perspective of let's say a white person who is in the community benefiting from these things, but just kind of, he feels like something's not right, but he would just rather look the other way, which is something that you and I could more relate to, right? We aren't, but the fact is that the white people in the film are mostly the people who are actively and consciously involved in murder and theft, and so it sort of misses the mark in showing me a sinner, but not a murderer.
Sure.
In my complicity,
sure.
Because it's showing me things that I would never do.
Yeah.
Except for under very vastly different circumstances, and it's not showing me enough to make me see how under such and such circumstances I could be capable of doing something evil like this.
Yeah, and
I know that in theory that's true, but the film, to be a good film, it has to do more than just tell me that in theory.
Yeah. Yeah, and several times throughout the film, something is said to the effect of this evil that the white men have brought in, or like this violence that the white men have brought in, is spoken by characters, it's almost as if like before,
like a mystical kind of way.
Well, yeah, but it's almost like before they struck rich, original sin didn't exist. You know what I mean?
Right.
Which is like just it does serve to, I think, flatten the tension, the conflict, and like the extent to which we can really sympathize.
Right.
I think it it's unfortunate. Now, I mean, like,
and the main really flawed Indian character that we see, in terms of maybe moral flaws, or is the sister of Molly, who's the drunkard and all of that, and kind of unpleasant. But that's another trope, as the white people brought in alcohol, and then the Indians weren't prepared for it and got
right. Exactly. It's the same with the young man who's a melancholic, and he's a flawed character, but ultimately he's just like a victim,
Right.
So
right.
So yeah. So I think that I really enjoyed the film. I think it's a good movie. I think that Scorsese continues to do what he does best, and I'd say if you enjoy Scorsese films, or if this seems like the kind of film you'd be into, then you probably will be into it. But I also just kind of can't help but just be honest about it also feels a little meh. And I think that,
and I don't really want to watch it again, especially given the length. Not that I resent the length so much, but it is certainly a factor in whether I decide to watch a film again.
Whereas when Silence came out, I'm pretty sure I saw it twice, like back, like the very next day I went back to the theater and saw it again. And Age of Innocence, I would watch that again in a heartbeat, And I have rewatched several of Scorsese's films. Mean Streets, we've talked about, I've shown that to a number of people. So, it's like meh. All right, everybody, thanks. And if you've made it this far, thank you for listening, but also hear us out while I tell you about our fall campaign. Right now, we're trying to raise $100,000 to win a $100,000 matching grant. So if you've been enjoying this podcast or any of our other podcasts and you haven't supported us directly, this is a perfect time to do so. Toss us $10 and we'll get that matched. Toss us $50 and we'll get that matched. Everything's going to be basically doubled in value. So, the campaign ends December 8th. We have to raise the full amount by then in order to win the grant. So head over to catholicculture.org/donate and help us out.
All right. Well, everybody, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Criteria is a production of catholicculture.org. Check out our other podcasts, including Way of the Fathers, an early church history podcast hosted by Mike Aquilina, Catholic Culture audiobooks, bringing to life classic Catholic writings, and the Catholic Culture Podcast, an interview show exploring Catholic arts, culture, and issues. You'll find all of this, as well as Catholic news, commentary, liturgical year resources, and much more at catholicculture.org.